speak louder.
Why we got the Altoids?
I'm going to hit this down. Bang. All right, so now I'm moving here. All right, so yeah, I wanted to maybe there was something I wanted to say because the question, that was brought to me, and I guess it's understandable when you come from the general point of view, which is that the Earth is spherical, like I believe, that why would you spend time even talking about this subject? Why would you talk about the Earth being flat? This is silly. You're adding validity to it. And I've been asked that. And from my point of view, people say that about six-day creationists. And I'm a six-day creationist. People say that about people who believe in intelligent design. People say that, the attitude is, well, if you allow for conversation on it, you're validating it, and that's been used against Bible believers. To say there should be no dialogue because then you're either humanizing the opponent or you're validating the argument. But my view is, part of the responsibility of free speech is that you have to have the tolerance and you have to be able to hear different points of view. And that's how I view it. You have to be able to, if somebody is willing to talk to me and to speak, even if a person's a devil worshiper, but they say, I'd like to talk to you, and they're respectful, like I said.
I'm not a devil worshiper.
No, I know that. But my idea is that, if a person's going to be respectful, hear them out and let them speak. But I do want to say this kind of from the top. At least this is my expectation. My experience has been that when an absurd point of view, which is what I consider the idea of a flat Earth, as you may consider the idea of a spherical Earth an absurd point of view. So
I didn't always.
You didn't always, but I'm not saying that to berate you or your point of view. I'm just saying objectively, I consider it an absurd point of view. And so, in my experience, when there is an absurd point of view, for example, I consider evolution an absurd point of view. I consider that.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So that I would say that's a good example. So when an absurd point of view persists, for example, evolution, then in order for that point of view to continue and to last, the arguments in defense of it have to become more and more and more sophisticated. The more absurd, the more sophisticated. And so, for example, in the 1950s, when Crick and Watson discovered DNA, Darwin knew nothing about DNA. He thought the cell was just a simple glob. So now you have DNA, which is the language of life. And even atheists like Richard Dawkins talk about DNA like it's like they talk about information, And so you would think that something like that would be evidence that there's a designer, because information comes from intelligence, and it clearly points to an intelligent designer. But what ends up happening is the theory, in order to hold on to the theory, there has to become a more sophisticated answer to be able to answer that challenge. Stephen Jay Gould, late professor of Harvard, when he said there's a lack of transitional forms in the fossil record, what does he do? Updates the theory, comes up with punctuated equilibrium, so that you can't really falsify evolution. If somebody says that there is evidence for slow change over time, they can go with the other idea of evolution, or they can go with punctuated equilibrium. So basically, the idea of a flat Earth, I would expect the argument in defense of it to fall into three categories. The one category is a highly elaborate defense that probably is going to go over my head, because I'm a simple person. I'm terrible at math, and I'm not a physicist. And I approach things, I come from a biblical point of view. So I'm, having a theological background and philosophy where it overlaps with theology, they both overlap, and sometimes history, because all of those overlap. But so I would expect either a highly elaborate defense or conspiracy-oriented defense. A defense that basically amounts to there is a grand conspiracy involved.
Do you not believe?
Well, I'll answer that, but basically, when it comes to conspiracy, I believe in a conspiracy in that there is a controversy between Christ and Satan.
No,
I
that's the main one, but I mean, I'm
Yeah,
talking about here
yeah.
on this plane.
Well, it would depend, I think, it would depend on the evidence for it. And there would have to be, have to be a reasonable, there have to be reasonable arguments. And that kind of falls into my third, I guess the third prong, or the third direction I think a defense for a flat earth can be made. So I said, a very highly elaborate defense, conspiratorial defense, or something that makes sense. Something that makes sense, but is not actually proof. There are times when, things can make sense. Somebody can say, well, the earth looks flat. It seems to be flat from our experience, but it's not actually proof. So those are kind of, so I just want to let you know from the outset, I kind of expect the argument to fall in one of those three.
Right.
Anyway, what my first question to you, because I don't want to mischaracterize, so I'd like you to spend some time explaining to me your cosmology, because
How I got there?
no, in other words, your
What it looks like.
what does it look like? How do you what is the sky? I don't expect you to say, well, it's made of this material or that, to go into all that detail, but what does it look like, and how do you come to that conclusion?
Okay, well, I mean, all right, so we'll start biblically. So God separated the waters from the waters. Is that correct? Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll leave it at that, and we live in the space between. That's how I see it. So that's if you're asking how I see how these things work. Now, the firmament is above us, right? And the sun and the moon are firmly planted in the firmament above us. We reside on a flat plane, where north is the center point.
Mm-hmm.
So all things lead to the North Pole. All right. Now think of like when you were a kid.
Okay.
When you were a kid, and there was like a maypole.
Maybe you could
With
draw.
the board
You
up?
want to
The
draw
board
anything?
won't help. Actually, 3-dimensional is better. So if you have a pole coming up from the North Pole, and a string at any length that you want. Now, north and south is just 360 in either direction.
Okay, well,
Equidistant.
let me, can you draw it? Because that'd be, maybe we could
He's
draw it.
black. He's black, yeah.
That way I could see it better.
So you have the North Pole here,
Uh-huh.
right? So east and west is a simple left or right hand turn around, equidistant from the North Pole. So so you want to stay on the same longitude line, you just have to stay equidistant from the North Pole. South.
Wait, this is the North Pole?
That's the North Pole.
And
South is all around us.
and this is east and west?
Well, east or west, whichever direction.
So you're
you
looking
decide to go.
downward from an aerial point.
Yeah, you're looking down.
Yeah, I get that, but I
Right.
don't understand how that's east or west.
Well, east or west is just, so in other words, to stay in a straight line east, due east, you just got to stay equidistant from the North Pole. Just like this, like I'm saying, like this is a tether,
Mm-hmm.
and if you stay equidistant from the North Pole, that'll just keep you on that same latitude line. Now, there's a lot more to this.
Yeah, I'm having
To
trouble
it.
even following
What
that.
about the circumference? The radius is the same, you're saying, all the way around. It's a perfect circle, you're saying.
Maybe we can move this over, because it's not on the camera.
It's tied up. I'll move the
It's
camera.
just my head.
I'll move the camera.
Smoke hole.
Oh, it's on there. What do you mean?
Yeah.
But, okay. So the north is here.
North is at your center, is our center point.
The center point is in the north?
Right.
Okay, having trouble kind of connecting that to,
And south is every direction away from north. So in other words, if you're standing here, south is 360.
so south is every direction away from north?
Mhm.
Okay. Oh, okay, so east is to the right of the north,
Well, east
or the left of,
would just be, one direction or the other, or
okay. All right.
So that's the basic layout.
But but as far as the earth itself, if this is the flat plane,
Right.
if this is the flat plane, right?
Mhm.
Now, are you saying there's pillars down here?
Well, I mean, that's what they talk about in the Bible. You mean the pillars
Okay,
beneath.
so
But I'm not telling you that it's floating in some sort of empty vacuum either.
okay, so you're not really sure what you
Well, I tend to believe that it's the infinite plane idea. I mean, the sun and the moon revolve around the plane of the earth.
Okay.
But I don't know what's out here. Basically what I've seen, and from what like things like Captain Cook has written, and a lot of other early explorers, and if you see pictures of the ice wall around the South Pole,
So is the ice, what goes around here?
it's basically an ice wall
Around the whole
around the whole
circumference?
circumference. Right, exactly. You
So
got it
there'd be
perfect.
an ice wall around here.
There's an ice wall around there, and then this continues.
So it's not endless?
I don't know. Don't have no clue.
Oh, you're not sure if it's
I mean,
endless or
look,
if
we've
there's
never
a-
been there, so I'm just giving you what, just the 360 view that I've gotten of it so far.
And above head would be the dome?
Above that would be, if it's a dome, or
I don't want to
right,
mischaracterize.
it may or may not be. Obviously, we don't know. I've seen, there's some videotape of rockets amateur rockets that they shot up, where the rocket is spinning, 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 and it's going up. It hits something. Now, it doesn't blow up. It just hits something, completely stops, and then it comes back down. So, I mean, there is something, there is some sort of, you know,
So you basically, this would be, for our argument's sake, you would say this would be fine.
that's fine. Then
It might be a bubble, it might be a square.
Right, exactly. It could be,
But
it
if it was
could be
square-
higher, it could be further away from us. I mean, maybe this is too close.
And where would the sun and moon be in
The
here?
sun would be in somewhere in this path.
What way would they go like this, or would they go circling?
I would say they would circle. They would stay level.
They would
Seems as
circle
though
in the
they-
middle
They
here.
stay level. Now, understand something now. Everything works on perspective. So with this model, until you understand what the idea of perspective, so this model, the sun would need to be much closer. So the sun would probably be here.
It'd be very
It
low,
would be very low. The moon would be here, reasonably low.
and they'd be very
And
slow.
what happens is, at a certain point, the reason why the sun sets and rises is due to perspective as it traverses the plane.
So the
So
the sun
you
is,
have day and night, basically, right? The day and night line, and it's just because the sun goes too far away for us to see it. Now that's getting into a whole other thing because my biggest problem is, and where I came from in the beginning, I started this with Mike, I don't know how many years ago, 12 years ago. And all I was complaining about was that there's some problems with Einstein
Mhm.
and his theories.
Yeah.
And I had some issues with light theory and speed of light and things of that nature. But now at this point,
And these go go around and around like this.
yeah,
They kind of just go
it's
around.
just like
and around.
clocks above the clock hands above us,
And one of them is a little faster than the other.
just a bit. Yeah.
The sun would be faster, right?
Well, I'm not sure exactly because it depends on how you look at it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it seems as though that's the way it works out.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that's the basic idea. So, but I got to this point through that. I mean, Mike and I were very interested in free energy. I still am constantly on the free energy sites and things of that nature. But at a certain point, I'm researching these different things, and I just said to myself, "Wow!" I actually came across this one video that the guy questioned it. He questioned and showed you that the plane is flat and there's no curve, and you can't find the curve. So there was a simple formula. It's 8 inches per mile squared is what the curve should be. So simply stated, it's for every 8 miles that you look out. For every mile you look out, every 1 mile you look out, there should be 8 inches of curvature, right? So when you get out to the point of like 27, 30 miles, things that are out 27 or 30 miles should be hundreds of feet below your eye line. And once the P900 camera came out, there's people doing it all the time. I mean, you could pull it up online easily. People are pulling up cities that are across bays that are impossible for us to see based on that calculation. So that was one problem. So, I mean, for me, that was big. The second thing that really got me was,
So they would be able, if they're over here
right,
and they're at this point, and all the way over here is a city.
27
over here.
miles away,
and they're able to see the city.
Yeah, I don't have the calculations with me right now, but if you're like 30 miles away,
Mm-hmm.
that city should be way below the visibility. I mean, even
The
if
curvature.
it's way below the curvature.
Okay.
And it doesn't, and there's, situations where they're able to, people will tell you all the time, oh no, that boat just, it passed the curve of the earth. And that's not it. That's not the case. Well,
But that curvature is also based upon the Earth supposedly being 25,000 miles around.
right, well, exactly.
And that's how they get the
Well, I mean,
calculation.
look, you got to go by their science because that's what they're giving us. So they give us that, so that curvature model works based on that.
Right.
Um, so, all right, so that's one thing. Now the other thing was the pictures that we've gotten from space. Fake. I mean, I showed Mike that one about. Did you see the one about something funny happened on the way to the moon? And it's out there on YouTube. And basically, what it was they put in a FOIA request to receive different things from NASA, and supposedly they got this thing.
So what would be your proof that these pictures are fake?
Oh, that's solid proof as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, it's showing Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin literally faking how they're doing this, showing us the moon. They're saying they put the camera all the way up into the window of the little capsule, right? So that's taking the camera and you're putting it right up here, and then you're looking at the Earth. That's how that's what they told us when we were little kids and we were watching, when I was watching it all. What they actually show in this particular piece of footage is that the lights come on, the guy gets in the way of the camera. They're actually talking back and forth of how they're actually doing it to make it. They actually said that they had it in the thing, but meanwhile, the lights go on, the camera, and you see the inside of the capsule, and you still see the Earth, but you see it through the window, and they're supposed to be like 3/4 of the way to the moon at that point.
I like the one with the flag waving in the air.
Well,
in the vacuum of space.
Right. The issue with the flag waving is there's a million people that can argue with that. This particular thing, they really can't argue. You can't really argue with the bubbles. I mean, where's bubbles? There's no bubbles.
What do you mean? Oh, bubbles and
Bubbles, well, they're supposedly doing spacewalks.
Oh.
And they catch them all the time. I mean, they catch the Chinese doing it. They catch the other. And the other thing is, it's real simple. I love space. I was crazy about it. I thought the idea was the coolest thing ever when I was a kid. All the way up until recent times. And when somebody told me there's no 300, look, if I had a camera up in space, I'd be taking the pictures that you couldn't believe. I would show you everything. I would want to show my mother and my father and my grandparents. I want to see everybody, look how cool this is. There's no real cool pictures from space. You get this kind of view. You get the camera to here. You never see the camera pan 360 degrees, ever. And, look, I'm an astronaut with a camera out in space. Okay, yeah, maybe I got some, and if you really look at the things that they're supposedly taking these spacewalks for, it's almost kind of silly. You got these fat little fingers, and you're in this huge suit. Supposedly you're doing this intricate work that's going to take 3 hours. But let's assume that that's real, that they had to do that. You're out there with the camera for 5 seconds. We're up there and spending billions and billions of dollars to go there. Stand around and give me a 360. Show me the moon. Show me the Earth. Show me everything. They don't do it. So once I saw all that, and really looked into it, that's when I was like, whoa, something's really wrong. I mean, it's not the story that I was told to be true. Because I know what it would be. If I go to Aruba and I wanted to show you how beautiful the waterfalls are in Aruba, you get a good video.
But even if somebody, for argument's sake, and I'm not saying that I agree or disagree, because I'm not familiar with the videos you're talking about, but somebody could say, well, these videos are, maybe they are doctored, maybe they are false, but that still doesn't mean that that's still not proof that the Earth is flat.
Well, we don't have to go there as far as that goes yet. But all I'm saying is, it's pretty good reason to look further. So I'm going to say, if you once you negate the fact that they've basically been showing us pictures from space of, they make them beautiful, they make these, the blue marble and all that stuff. But when people put Photoshop to it,
Credibility.
they've actually put Photoshop, people that are, editors and, photo editors, and there's plenty out there, and it shows you that it's fake. It wasn't the original picture. So, I mean, that's out there as well. So,
But what, I mean, they have pictures going back before Photoshop, well before, into the 1960s.
but even, right, so, okay, so you know that our technology that they give us and the technology they have is way in advance. So yeah, some people will tell you that, well, they didn't have Photoshop. Well, they probably did. When Kubrick was making the movie that we went to the moon, you know, they had Photoshop. They were able to do some of those things. And that's what I'm saying.
But what is the proof that they had Photoshop in the 1960s?
Well, there's only the fact that when you look at those photos and the photo editors put them through the the process now, it shows up that these things can't really, they weren't there originally on that film. So in other words, a photo editor who really knows what they're doing can take an old photo and they do it. No, they do it and they put it in there and they show you that this this was overlaid into this and that was that, even though it was an old photo.
But I mean, do you have an example of a photo editor who didn't have a bias, who did that?
I don't. Here's the thing. The great thing.
In other words, somebody who just objectively says, "Hey, wait a second, this isn't there." Not somebody who's coming into it with an agenda to prove that the Earth is flat or something like that. You have an example of a photo, an unbiased or even a well-known photo editor.
I'll look at it this way. I like to think that most people aren't doing anything for nefarious reasons. I personally, like I said, I completely believe that the Earth was round and that we could fly through space and there was trillions and trillions of miles to explore out there.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, I have no agenda.
Yeah.
Really, and I've come to this conclusion. I believe the people that I see that show me different things, they're real people. I know them. I talk to a lot of them. They've come up with different formulas. There's different things that they've discovered. It makes sense to me, and they don't have any necessary agenda. Don't get me wrong. There is an agenda out there because there's a division that they want to do. The people who want to keep the secret, because obviously it is a secret. Right? If it's just NASA alone, they want to keep us divided as possible. So.
Yeah, can you explain more? How do you see the spherical Earth as playing into an evil agenda?
Because when you take a little speck of dust that's smaller than the here's a who civilization, right? And you throw it up and it's spinning endlessly in everlasting space, and we all believe that we really have no. They lead us to believe outside of, look, I'm not saying you're in the right way. You believe. You know the story. You know where you're going. You know it's real. But the masses don't believe it because of that little spinning ball. We're a little speck of nothing into nothingness, and I'm going to do what I want, be what I want, be as evil or as promiscuous or as whatever I want because nothing really matters. And that's what they wanted to bring us to, and that's what they got. This model, when you see this isn't based on basic science. This is way, 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 way above what we could even comprehend. This is harder to comprehend, but it leads you to God.
Okay, I see what you mean, but I mean, if as far as I'm concerned, if someone like Richard Dawkins or Crick and Watson can look at DNA, I mean that information.
You know what I believe about the old dinosaur bones, right? And I mean, they're fake. They made them up for us. I mean, I don't know what they were, Cro-Magnon men. Some people say that Cro-Magnon men were just real biblical people that lived 600 years, 700 years. Saying that our skeletons continue to grow, and if you live 600 years or 1,000 years, you're going to look a little.
Well, how do you know they're fake?
Well,
or why do you conclude they're fake?
The Smithsonian will not allow you to test anything.
Okay.
You'll never get a drill with all these bones that they found. You go to the Museum of Natural History, right? With all these bones they supposedly found, they guard them so incredibly well that you'll never get to drill in and check DNA and do it on your own. Everything is all in-house, big secret. There's some good people that did some really great work on that. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but look, I don't believe for a second in the lie of evolution. I know it's a lie, right? But that's part of the lie. It's all part of the same thing.
I mean, the way that I see it, like I said, when the reality of DNA became known, you would think that that would have been enough to stop the lie of evolution. That here we have evidence that inside of every cell is a mini factory with this DNA, with this blueprint for building proteins and for building life. There's a wonderful documentary called Unlocking the Mystery of Life with Dean Kenyon, a molecular biologist, Michael Behe, who wrote Darwin's Black Box.
Mhm.
And so these were people that believed in evolution, but in light of this evidence, what Michael Behe calls irreducibly complex molecular machines. And when they really start breaking down these molecular machines, or even DNA, or the process by which these things happen, I would say that is clear evidence of creation. I mean, if you're going to argue with that, then you could use this too. An evolutionist, if they could take DNA and they could say that just came together by chance, they could do the same with this. And even if there's no dinosaurs, if a person wanted to believe it, they can do it. I believe that the Bible says the human heart is deceitful and above all things desperately wicked. Jeremiah 17:9 says that. Every inclination of the thoughts of men's heart is evil continually. Genesis 6:5. So, as far as I'm concerned, they could do the same with this if they could do with those things.
Well, that's what
They would have no issue with it.
I think that's what they did.
They could say that somehow this evolved, and this is a product of evolution, time, and chance. I'm saying your model.
I think it'd be harder. I think that would have been a lot harder than what they did. Because, I mean, don't forget,
If they did it with DNA, I don't see how they can't do it with anything.
well, as far as DNA is concerned, I'm 3/4 on the bus and 25% off. Because one of the things that they got when they explained to us all this exciting things that they could do with DNA is somehow they got this right to play around with it. And as far as I'm concerned, GMOs and any kind of reconstructing of our fruits and vegetables and our biology, I think is a horror, against God and people.
Yeah.
So to some extent, I have a problem with all of their, I think they've taken it too far.
I mean, but there are people, Paul, that they don't even believe in literal reality. Like that you're sitting in front of me and I'm sitting in front of you. There are people who believe this is all an illusion.
Well, it's God's reality, and thankfully, each one of us have our own point of view, and we have the ability to discuss it.
Yeah, but
that's what's exciting is how that's a real long discussion if you want to discuss what actually.
my only point is you'll find people that could defend any point of view.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if somebody is dead set on saying that there is no God, even if they were convinced that this model is true, they could say that this evolved just the same way.
They could.
I mean, look at the human body. Look at the eye. All of the things that have to be set in place for the eye to work the way it does. It's a wonderful example of design.
Well,
look at the ear.
There are some great people out there that
These are clearly examples of design.
will show you that basically we live in God's eye, and if that, I mean, they got a pretty cool model. It's out
Yeah.
there. They basically say that we live on the lens of God's eye. I don't know.
Yeah, but
makes
I mean,
sense.
the point that I'm making is that on the flip side, if you ever see some of these arguments, like Richard Dawkins in his book The God Delusion, his argument against Michael Behe, who became a believer in intelligent design, his argument against him, or at least one of the arguments that was in the book, was that Michael Behe lacked imagination. Now, from the point of view of somebody who would pride himself on being logical and only going with empirical evidence,
Right.
to submit imagination as science, I mean, as a Christian, you say, wait a second, thought you guys are against a blind leap of faith.
Mhm.
But basically, a person's mind can work in a way that will allow them to keep that lie going, and they might not even be aware of it. I mean, some of the statements that Richard Dawkins make, you would say, how can you not believe in creation? Like when he talks for example, I think it's on page 141 of The God Delusion, because I read that book and I took notes on it and I argued with the book, and so when he made the point about how the universe is basically it is perfectly equipped to support life. And then he starts talking about the 6 constants. And how can you say, well, things just kind of happen?
Yeah.
It can't just happen. So, but in his mind, he'll argue and he'll.
But the most evil religion on this planet is science. That's the most evil religion. I mean, then whatever behind it follows suit. But science is a religion today. I mean, and what the worst part about it is that you go to kindergarten and you sit there with a globe on your desk and the teacher tells you this is the way it is. I used to argue. I used to say, hey, I don't understand. How is it possible? I used to argue with my teacher. All right, so we're on the globe. I take off in an airplane or I take off in a helicopter. So why can't I just stand still and wait for this to move 1,000 miles an hour? It's moving 1,000 miles an hour under my feet. So how come I don't land over here without, just hovering? Well, how come when I'm doing 1,200 miles an hour in a supersonic airplane, how come I don't fly off into space? I mean, I've done the calculations, and after just about 5 or 6 minutes at 1,200 miles an hour, you'd be so high, you'd be in orbit. But that doesn't happen.
But what when
But
the Bible.
This is just the arguments that you couldn't get away with as kids.
I mean, my point of view is this: unless there's to make it very simple, if there is no God, then there's no way to even trust your own thoughts.
Right.
Because we trust that our logic and the way even your sight is only made sense of in your brain, and it's your mind that processes these things. And the mind itself is not something that someone can open up and say, okay, this is that memory and this is that memory. The brain and the mind are 2 different things. You can cut open a brain, but you can't find inside of the brain, okay, this was the memory of this, and here we can look inside a person's brain and know everything they're thinking. No, you can't do that.
Well, the government wants to try to do that now.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, hear me out. What I'm trying to say is that with the brain, with the human brain, with the mind, we make sense of reality. But if a person doesn't believe in God, what they're in essence saying is that you can get design from a mindless process. And I always say that if life, and I'm talking about life in the ultimate sense, I say if life wasn't created on purpose, it has no purpose because there's no purpose behind it. If you don't have a purpose behind something you're doing, then you're doing it purposelessly. And so if the brain has no purpose, if the human brain has no purpose, then its purpose is not to be able to use logic and reason and make sense of the world. Because that's a very specific thing. To be able to say that I can accurately understand reality, and yet at the same time to say that the brain itself has no purpose. So if it has no purpose, there's no way you can even trust your own thoughts. If you don't believe in God, how do I know you're sitting in front of me? How do I know that this isn't a dream? How do I know I exist? There's really no basis for trusting your brain if you believe your brain is just a fluke. And I remember talking with an atheist, and that's what he said life is, just a fluke. Mm-hmm. I said it was an accident. I said, you got a choice, either an accident or a miracle. And he said, no, neither one, it's a fluke. But I mean, saying it's a fluke sounds even worse than an accident.
Yeah, no, I'm not on that. I'm not on that train at all.
Yeah, but what I mean is to say this. There must be a God. Because without a God, there's no way to even trust logic. I mean, did logic evolve? Did mathematics evolve? Did these unseen realities evolve? How can that be explained? And for us to be able to make sense of it.
Well, that's
and none of it makes sense if there's no God. Unless there's a God who not only designed us, but wanted us to know real things, wanted us to be able to make sense of the world. If that's not the case, then I can't really.
But we did, look, Adam and Eve kind of put us out of the garden, right? We don't have full understanding.
Yeah.
So we're here with the ability to make that, to figure things out. I mean, I don't know exactly what it is, but we're blinded in some ways. We were put here blinded in some ways. So we're here to figure things out. I'm at the point now where Flat Earth, to me, I'm probably 1.5 years, 2 years into it, and that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, from there, I always believed in God. I would ask God for the answers for my physics and what I wanted to know, what I was interested in. I would ask, and I would then research it, and get some crazy chills when I found it, and it was incredible. Um, but now where I'm at, as far as the flat Earth is concerned, I'm even past it. I'm not that I'm past it, but I don't even need to argue with it with anybody. I mean, I'm comfortable with the fact that I live on a flat plane. That's what I believe. That's my belief. Doesn't it helps my belief with God? I feel stronger and closer. Um, I'm not perfect by any stretch, so that's, I'm still working towards that, getting better. But my next thing is that there is an evil force that that takes over evil people, and wants them to be in power, remain in power. Um, I've kind of gotten to the point to believe that it's real. It's probably real and a little more powerful here on Earth than we like it to be. And then most people just kind of walk through their day to day, and they spend a lot of time watching television. Television is and that's their tool. Started with newspapers, because they're given information. So you give information, false information. We take it in. Oh, it's so exciting. They went to the moon. These people went to the moon. And I was excited as a kid. I would jump into that. My father loved it. We were sitting there watching TV on the little, crappy television back in the days. And I thought it was amazing. But they got us. They got us from birth into a lie so that we submit to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that we don't believe. And they were able to keep division. See, there wouldn't be nearly as much division.
That's what I just
What's
said.
this,
That's a link.
Mr. Producer?
Well, you were talking earlier, before the sermon today about the time periods from when Flat Earth started, when the first maps started,
Mm-hmm.
and how it took hold, and you were saying that there wasn't any of that time period, but that, from Wikipedia, which you were citing, cites those time periods when the Earth was deemed to be flat in those time periods. I think it was 5th and 6th centuries.
Oh, well, I'll talk more on this, but I wanted to
Okay.
finish. Oh, I did want to say a couple of things in response to a point you made earlier. I don't view science as being evil. I view godless science as being evil, because in the Bible there is a basis for science. Even back in the Garden of Eden, and when God called Adam to name the animals, and in the Bible the name represents the character. So God wasn't just calling him to say, "Oh, dog, cat, fish, whatever." He was calling him to look at these animals in a sensitive way and to give them a name. And there we see a basis, this sensitive observation, which is really what science is, to carefully observe the world. When the Bible says in Romans 1:20 that you can tell about God's eternal power and divine nature by the things he has created. So there's a basis there for looking at the created world, making sense of it, because God makes sense, because God is a God of order.
But if I may for a second, problem with science is that science is controlled by men, currently. Now, if you said, listen, Paul, I took cobalt and magnesium, I put them together, and I came up and I made this incredible discovery. You and I get together, it's an incredible discovery. Today, our science, not to say that all of it, but they're doing everything they can to lead us in the wrong direction. And from everything from medicine.
So that would be godless science you're against.
Well, of course.
You're not against true science.
No. I mean, look.
So it's not that you're against science, you're against
the current mainstream science.
Science with a wicked agenda behind it.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I thought.
Rockefeller medicine. I mean, I could point you to a video that is pretty incredible. And I just recently lost my father not too long ago from cancer, and I was pretty well studied, and I knew things that he should have been doing.
Did you have a good relationship with your father?
I did. I worked with him every day for the time I got out of college.
I'm sorry for your loss.
But when you really look into Rockefeller medicine and what actually transpired and how they took us in such a wrong direction, when there was really good people doing great work curing cancer at like 80% rates, to now they're doing it. They're killing us with the chemo. That's what they basically come out. And I don't believe in it. I don't. just not my. So there's that. There's there's this. For me, with NASA, I have a big problem. And for that, if that's not real,
Well, what do you think they're doing? What do you think they're trying to do?
put up a show. The whole thing's a
But
show.
for what end?
To divide us, to make us believe that we're a spinning ball in endless space, and that we can go to Mars, and some cute little kid and is going to jump up and down and say, "I'm going to go to Mars."
And so we don't find out the truth, so they can keep us oppressed. We find out the truth, we gain more
Gain
energy, more
well,
power.
the ultimate thing would be the free energy thing, because currently the electricity that's coming to this room is being recirculated, recycled, and they tell us that they gotta pump in so much gas to make the electric go, and they get that nuclear is so dangerous, but we're gonna do it anyway. And we're gonna put nuclear power plants everywhere for you. Nuclear isn't dangerous. If we were able to play around with radium, it wouldn't kill us. Galen Windsor, if you want to look him up on YouTube, he was one of the forefathers of working with uranium and swimming in the spent pools and things of that
Drinking
nature.
it too.
He was drinking the stuff.
What?
Drinking
it.
Drinking
the uranium rods, the
radium
water.
rods. The reason they didn't want us to play around with it is because there's plenty of people that are incredibly smart that would have figured out how to make a simple power plant that you put in your backyard, and you wouldn't be beholden to the government energy. And they're selling that to us right across the board.
And TVs, too. Do you know they came out with color TVs before they did with black and white? They saturated the market with black and white TVs.
I didn't know
And
that.
this way they know they could, let's do this for 10 years, and then we'll say, hey, so we got color TV, let's
Well, right,
saturate
because they're
it.
not going to give you that, right. And it wasn't all that long. It wasn't that many years, really. What was it, 8, 9 years, 10 years?
Yeah, I
Maybe
remember the transition, yeah.
And my father had a black and white TV. When I was a kid, I had a black and white TV. But by the time I was...
Didn't they do that with the NASA, with the moon, too? Where they were shooting inside with a color camera or something, and all of a sudden everything else, we only got black and white?
No, with the moon shooting, supposedly that whatever their main picture was, they actually showed it to us on TV off of a screen in a theater.
Yeah, and that had to be duplicated,
and
the resolution was just horrible.
I wanted to make a few points, I guess, from where I'm coming from. In the Bible, the word that's translated in some of the versions of the Bible as well, I guess if let's take a look, for example. If we take a look, you could use Bible Hub. Bible Hub is pretty good. So if we go to Genesis,
You want to use a laptop?
it doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to go to Genesis 1:6, which is where the firmament is mentioned. Okay, so Genesis 1:6. And I'm going to go on Bible Hub. Bible Hub's a good software because it shows you different translations, but it also shows you the Hebrew. And you can break it down that way. So, you see this translation that says vault?
Yeah.
And you'll see that in some translations, some will say space. There are a number of different translations. This says firmament. Some say expanse. That's the word for translated firmament. Now you can look here and see the Hebrew on the Bible Hub, and so if we go to that word that is translated firmament, rakia is the word here. Now this is interesting, but before I say why, but the word is rakia, and there are different words that I'm not strong in the Hebrew. In the Greek, that's the one I've spent over 10 years with. But the Old Testament's in Hebrew. So the Hebrew, I do contact a couple of professors every now and then with questions about the Hebrew from Andrews University, Dr. Roy Gain, Dr. Randall Yonker. Randall Yonker is actually an archaeologist, but when I was asking about some of these passages, Dr. Roy Gain said that Dr. Randall Yonker had done more original research in that area. So I was asking about these particular passages. What Dr. Yonker is saying, and I've taken a couple of classes with him, and they make a lot of sense to me. And in his own way, Roy Gain coincided with it. Is basically that the translation vault is basically a translation that's based on a misunderstanding from the 19th century. But before I explain that more, I wanted to look at Genesis 1:8. Now, Genesis 1:8, wait a minute, I made a mistake here. Genesis 1:8. Genesis 1:8 is when the word heaven is used. So here it says, okay. Okay. Now, the New International Version doesn't mention it, but if we look in the Hebrew, we'll look at it right there, what the Hebrew of that Genesis 1:8 is. Okay, so the name heaven, and God called, the word order is different, and God called the firmament heaven. But the Hebrew word heaven is in the plural. The Hebrew word for heaven. God calls the firmament heavens. Heavens. In fact, in some translations, if you look at Genesis 1:1, the very first verse in Genesis, where it says, in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth, there are certain versions of the Bible that will say heavens. For that verse, they'll translate it heavens, but then when it comes to verse 8, they'll translate it heaven singular. But meanwhile, the Hebrew is plural. So the firmament is called the heavens, but it's plural. And what's interesting about that is, in the Bible, in the book of 1 Corinthians 12, and verse 2, Paul speaks about how he was brought up to the third heaven. So there are three heavens, and the third heaven is understood to be the place where God dwells. The first heaven is the atmosphere, the second one is space, the third is the heaven where God dwells. Now, if we consider the heavens in this sense, then what the Bible is saying is giving us a picture of the heaven where God dwells in Revelation and Ezekiel and other instances, and it's definitely not a flat plane. It's an expanse. It's a space. And actually, the translation expanse is a much more accurate translation of rakia than is vault. Vault is not an accurate translation. Why did vault become a translation? What happened? Basically, in the 19th century, that's when 18th and 19th century, really starting in the 18th century. 18th and 19th century is when textual historical criticism started to develop. It was somebody, prior to that, it was understood Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, which is what the Bible is saying. So when you have passages like John 5:46 and 47 that mention Moses, when you have passages like the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, starting in Luke 16:19, and in that parable it's stated, Abraham, it's a parable, Abraham says they have Moses and Elijah to listen to. Or they have Moses and the prophets to listen to. If they're not going to listen to them, they're not going to listen to anyone. Basically, what is being said is that the scripture is written by Moses and the prophets. The understanding, again, 1 Kings 2:3. Again, the writings of Moses. Moses wrote these things. This was the understanding that Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch. What happened in 1684, there was a man born named Gene Ostruck. Now, he developed the idea that Moses didn't actually write the Bible. He was like an editor. And then from that point on, you had Johann Gottfried Eichhorn. In 1844, Julius Wellhausen was born. The idea developed, which became the documentary hypothesis, that the first 5 books weren't actually written by Moses at all. It was from a period from the 10th to the 5th and the 4th century. And Moses, according to the biblical timeline and conservative scholarship, the Exodus should have happened in around 1445 BC. So it couldn't have been from the 10th to the 4th century that the first 5 books of the Bible were written, that Genesis was written. Couldn't have been. It'd be too late. It definitely wouldn't have been Moses. So to say it wasn't Moses that wrote the Bible, to say that actually it was constructed much later, The documentary hypothesis basically says there were the Yahwehists, and so when you see certain areas of the Bible where Yahweh is used, that was the first group. Then there were the Elohists. That was the second group. So when you see Elohim, so when you look in Genesis 1 and 2, you see Yahweh used here, Elohim used there, and they were saying, well, it was different groups. And then along came the priests later on in the 5th century, and maybe even the 4th century, and they just kind of put it all together, kind of like a patchwork, like a puzzle. And so it was all concocted, and Moses had nothing to do with it. But the thing is, that idea is completely contrary to the Bible. If you believe that idea, then the Bible is a bunch of nonsense. You see? Out of those ideas, or within that school of thought, is the idea that the Jewish people, for example, Randall Yonker mentioned somebody named Frank Cross, and his idea, and other scholars like him, believe that what happened was the Jewish people, when they were in the Babylonian captivity, when they were captive by the Babylonian kingdom, which really was throughout mostly the 6th century, at the end of the 7th century. It was during that time when they were captive by the Babylonians that they took their ideas of cosmology, and the Babylonians had these ideas of a vaulted heaven. And so the Jewish people took those ideas. The problem with that whole thing is that the Bible is not actually stating that the Rakia is a vault. It's an expanse. And it's not even clear that the Babylonians even believed these things. But that was the idea that these textual critics said, that they took this idea of the flat earth, that this model, this is what they understood that the Babylonians were saying, that the Jewish people took that from them. And that's really...
Well, I got a question.
Yeah.
God gave us 10 perfect commandments.
Yes.
Why did he not just explain to us that we were a little speck floating through infinite space until we one day find it? And why didn't he also say that there's trillions of other stars with trillions of other planets with all of this possibilities going out there?
Yeah.
He gave us 10 perfect commandments, so why don't you tell us that there's our other brothers and sisters are out there someplace? The New World Order wants us to believe that. They want us to believe that one day we're gonna have this new religion at some point, and we're all gonna be one with these other civilizations. And I don't believe in aliens. I believe in heaven and hell, and I believe that there's demons.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as aliens. And for me, I know that the Bible's been changed by people, right? King James rewrote it. They rewrite it, and they put in what they want to put in over the years. But it's still, no matter what, no matter who rewrites or does what, or whoever has like a different word that they want to add to the Bible or change in some way, it still rings true regardless, for me.
Well, I mean, just to kind of try and answer the first question and even the second point you bring up, when God calls Abraham in chapter 15 of Genesis, and he says, count the stars if you can. And obviously, he's not able. Then when God says to Abraham, that's going to be your descendants, like the stars of heaven. This vast number. Later on, God compares Abraham's descendants to the sands of the sea. Can you count that? No. So it is understood, this is a number, an unfathomable number, that God is comparing the descendants of Abraham to. And the descendants of Abraham are not simply Jewish people, but the Bible reveals, they that be of faith. And then, so we take these two comparisons that God makes. He takes the stars as a comparison. He takes sand of the sea as a comparison to make this point. And finally, in the book of Revelation, chapter 7, we get a glimpse in verse 9 of the saved, which, from our point of view as Christians, they are the children of Abraham. So all Christians, all believers, all people who follow God, and it says there is a number that no man can number. So when we put those texts together, we understand that the heaven, and the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. So the heavens must be so vast that nobody can count the stars, according to these biblical passages.
Well, don't forget that your descendants could be infinite, but not necessarily any further than that local area. I mean, we have eternity. Doesn't necessarily mean that my descendants are going to be descendants. Yeah, my scientific side of my problem with light, trillions of light years away, is that I don't believe it at all for a second. The light cannot travel trillions of miles. So if our sun, and supposedly that we can see stars all the time that are the same size as our sun, you might need a telescope, so they say. Our sun, if it was 7 trillion miles away, light years, not miles, there's no way that we can see that light. Our eyes aren't nearly good enough. Our eyes aren't even good enough to see the horizon. What happens now? What our eyesight is made for is pretty simple, right? So here's me, and I'm standing looking out onto the ocean. What I see, if I could see this far, right now, I would be able to see all the way down here, but this is obscured by the ground, right? So all as I'm able to see is, let's say, this far. That's my line of sight. So I see everything in here, and I see everything straight out to the blue sky on the horizon, right? But what happens right here is it's called light convergence. So basically, it's a wave field convergence. So the reason why I can't see past this spot right here is because light bunches up for me. It doesn't bunch up all the way out here where I see the blue sky, and at nighttime it won't bunch up here where I can see this star. It doesn't bunch up where I can see the moon or the sun. But right here, where the ground comes in contact with the furthest part of my vision, you got a light wave convergence. Yeah. Okay. Now, no matter it. So if there's like a star out here on the horizon, that'll eventually get far enough away that that'll also come into this light field convergence. As things get further and further away from us, so long as that it'll hit that light field convergence, and we will not be able to see it. Now, the things that we can see straight up in the sky, there's nothing obscuring them. So there's no way that they're 7 trillion miles away, light years away from us. Our eyes aren't capable of seeing anything that far.
But don't you
and
think...
light doesn't travel that far. I mean, that's part of what I've come to as far as my physics understanding, is that one of the things they lied to us is about light speed, how light works. There's some great guys now, figuring things out on electricity. Sound is basically what I understand is what God brought the universe into existence with, right? Sound is faster than light.
Yeah.
But that's something else.
What about the sun being 93 million miles away too?
It's fake. I mean, that's been proven just with just simple calculations as the sunbeams come through the clouds.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's basically been calculated to be about 3,500 miles above the surface of the Earth.
Let me read this here concerning what I was talking about before. So talking about the rakia, which is best translated as expanse. The Hebrew word, according to Randall Yonker, he says over here. Okay, let's see. I'll try and find this. Oh yeah. So while the uses of rakia in Genesis 1 do not provide any direct, here it is. This leaves us with the final line of evidence for rakia, its actual usage in the Hebrew Bible. The basic verb rakwa, again, I don't know how you pronounce it in Hebrew, but that's the phonetic translation, simply means to stamp, spread out, or stretch. So the basic verb that rakia, which is translated expanse, or best translated expanse, but it's translated other things, would come from, would be spread out, stretch, or stamp. And then he goes on to say, the idea is to make something thin by stretching it out. It is important to note that there is nothing inherent in the word that evokes either a specific shape, a dome, or a material, metal. Rakwa is also used as a verb for non-metal objects, such as cloth, spreading cloth, or a tent, or gauze, in which the case of the idea of stretching. And the Bible, so when we see that there's this idea of stretching in the word rakia, the idea of stretching out, the Bible does repeatedly talk about the stretching out or the spreading out of heaven. For example, in Zechariah 12:1, he spreads out. There's repeated verses that talk about the spreading out of the heavens. Now, there's a creation scientist named Russell Humphreys, and one of the things he says is, I go to the Bible for my astronomy. He's an astrophysicist, Russell Humphreys. He has some videos on YouTube. And he says we can see the universe is expanding. So this is his cosmology. I'm not being dogmatic about it, and I don't even think he is. But he's saying we could see the universe is expanding, okay, according to this idea of all of these passages that talk of an expanding universe. And then he also says there are a number of passages that says that God counts the stars by name. And so he takes that to say that, but his knowledge is infinite. God's knowledge is infinite. But he counts the stars by name. And so he takes that to say, well, there must be a limited number of stars. It can't be infinite. There's a vast number, but it can't be an endless number. This is what Russell Humphreys is saying. And so what he's saying, if there is a limited number of stars, then that means there's a bound universe. The universe isn't endless, according to what he's saying. And if there is an expanse, or there is a stretching out of space, then that means in the beginning of creation it would have been much more condensed. And if there is a limited amount, if the universe is not endless, but it's actually bound, then there would be a center of gravity. And then he goes on to explain that the Earth being toward the center of that gravity, based on some secular sources, that apparently it's almost as though the stars are arranged in concentric shells, and it's as though the Earth is toward the middle of that. So what his concept is, and he does accept Einstein's theory of relativity to support his point of view. He's saying that if this is the case, then in the beginning of creation, the universe would have been much more condensed, and there would have been a deeper gravity well, and the Earth would have been toward the center of that gravity well, and out on the edges of the universe, time would have moved at a different speed than toward the center, because he says gravity affects time, and he spoke about the atomic clocks in Greenwich, England, and Boulder, Colorado. He says every year they're a little bit off, very slight, because one is high above sea level and the other one is low. And he's saying that gravity affects time, because he's saying that space is basically, there is a need for a sophisticated ether to understand Einstein's theory of relativity. And the ether or space is bent by mass. And so he's saying that because the Earth would have been closer to the center of the mass, that actually time could move. This is only his theory, that a few days could pass on Earth while millions of years pass on the edges of the universe, and so the light could travel, and we could see it on the fourth day when God created. It's just a theory, but it's taking into consideration what I like about the theory. And again, I'm not dogmatic about the theory. I mean, for me as a Bible believer, I think anybody who believes in the Bible will say God created the earth in a ready-made, mature state. In other words, when God created Adam wasn't a little baby, he wasn't a fetus. He looked like he was a fully grown man. Somebody seeing him would have said he must have been around 20, 40 years. But he was just created that day.
No, I haven't really looked it up, and I should have. But what does the Bible say about gravity? Or about the idea of power being stationary on or solid footing on the ground?
Well, I mean, obviously, the Bible doesn't use the word gravity.
Right.
Doesn't use that word. But someone with a biblical point of view did. Somebody with a biblical worldview, which is Newton, Isaac Newton.
I'm not so sure if he was so biblical.
He wrote more about the Bible than about science.
Yeah, but the stuff that I've read about Newton is he might have been on the other side. Because look, everybody on the other side has to read the Bible also, because they're not going to be able to get their power unless they know how to counteract it. So I'm not so sure about that.
Well, he had I can tell you he had some. I mean, and as I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and one of the things about the Adventist church is they take prophecy very seriously by letting Scripture interpret Scripture. And so there is in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, the 490-year prophecy. And Isaac Newton wrote on these prophecies, and he wrote about how this prophecy, if I remember correctly, it's been a while ago, but I remember reading it. And he understood that this prophecy, I think it was in Daniel 9, if I'm not mistaken, how it actually accurately told ahead of time the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, there's no way that somebody who's working against the Bible, there are plenty of people who believe in the Bible and don't even understand the prophecy of Daniel 9 and how it points to the crucifixion of Jesus. And even skeptics who say that Daniel was written long after the captivity of Babylon, even they can't deny the fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls have the book of Daniel in it. They have it there. So the biblical book of Daniel that we have is pretty much what these ancient manuscripts say. And it points to the crucifixion. So even if a person says, well, it wasn't written in the days of Babylon, it wasn't written in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, it wasn't written, but it was written hundreds of years before Jesus. The Essenes had it, they were, long before Jesus. And Isaac Newton was writing about this.
Are you sure, though, Isaac Newton's ideas weren't bad to deceive the people? Because
well, why would you deceive them by proving something? I mean, you could do it many. You could say I go to church,
well, you could prove
like many
thing.
politicians, right? Many politicians, they say they go to
but
church,
they have to have some credibility. So in other words, even if you can't be completely evil and get credibility, you got to gain credibility somehow. So like even the worst politician has to at least appear to be a good person.
But what you know the danger in what you're doing, though? The Bible is very clear that nobody can judge the motives of the heart.
No, I'm judging Newton. I'm not judging anybody in the Bible.
No, the Bible is clear. We're not supposed to do that. I mean, I can't, unless I have absolute proof of what somebody's motives are, I can't say this guy has evil motives.
Well, that's where I'm getting to. What Newton says is wrong. I believe that it's completely wrong, and that it's basically based on gravity, and our understanding of gravity is basically based on density, and there's nothing really further than that.
Yeah, but that's circular reasoning in a way, because what you're doing is you're saying the product of Newton's theory is evil, and therefore he must have been evil, or he must have had bad. But so when I say, well, you got to have proof to say somebody is, like if I say Hitler was evil, we have plenty of proof. But if I say Newton is evil, and then what is the proof he was evil? Well, gravity is evil, but that's circular reasoning.
No,
because you're assuming
the lie is evil, not the idea is an evil. It's the fact that they
but in other words,
lie, and they
if
taught us this lie, and they drilled it into our heads.
Even if you say it's a lie, let's say for argument's sake, if you want to say Newton was wrong, how do you know he wasn't genuinely wrong? It wasn't that he had evil intention; it was just genuinely wrong.
I can give you that.
If that's the case, then he was a Christian and he had good intentions.
Okay. But still, they took his work then, if it was genuine or not. They took his work and forced it upon us, and kept forcing it upon us, and teaching us things that were false, like the conservation of energy. I'm at the point now to know 100%.
Yeah.
Any professor that you want to argue about, I could pull a team of people together and we could rip it apart completely. They did that to us. They taught us that for an evil reason, to make us believe that you can't just generate energy yourself in your backyard.
I see what you're saying. Because I see I understand what you're saying. But here's my other. You can argue that, but unless you're speaking on a practical level, it is hard to say that that's the only way to interpret that. In other words, to say this is a reality that we can agree on. Let's say, imagine we agree on this reality. I mean, I don't agree on it, but let's say we agreed on it. Now I can say I agree with this, but I believe this is the product of evolution. So in other words, the reality, and is there only one way to interpret that reality?
Well, here's the problem. You know what? There's 7.5 billion people with all living within our own reality. You know what I'm saying? So some people believe 90% of what you say. Some people believe 5% of what I say. and each of them have their own opinions. There's no way to really change that too much.
Yeah.
There's no way to change that too much. So, look, you live in your reality, I'm living in mine. What I've come to is God is realer than I thought he was 10 years ago. The earth is flat, and people will lie to us from the day that I got into school to the day I graduated college. Energy is basically free, and that we all should be self-sufficient. That I walk on the land of the United States of America, and I don't live in the United States of America, and I'm not beholden to a government that, they've taught us a lie. So there's where our problem really lies. Now, how do you get out of it? How do you break free from that lie? I'm not really sure.
But again, when I mentioned the three-pronged approach, a lot of what you're saying falls into that conspiratorial aspect.
I mean, which part you want to go? You want to go with the government part?
Well, what you're saying, like if you say, well, they're teaching us a lie and there is something evil behind it, that does fall, I mean, obviously it falls into that conspiratorial argument.
But are the Rothschilds the richest people on the face of this planet?
I have to study more into Rothschilds. I have in the past. I have, for example, I have a documentary called Monopoly Men. I've read books like Behold a Pale Horse by Cooper, Ralph Epperson's New World Order. I've read these things, but you always got to take a step back and look at things from a biblical perspective, because there is a danger in getting to the point where you are either judging the motives of people's hearts or going too deep into an area that perhaps God might not want us to go too deep in. Remember that God is, the thing is that when the Bible says he will keep those at peace whose mind is stayed upon him, it's very easy to go down these different rabbit holes. There's only so many hours in a day.
Right.
So, when it comes to my studies, I try and stick to certain things, and most of it is directly biblical, related to the Bible.
These are the times where no secrets are going to be left unturned.
Yeah, and it's already happening.
That's where we're at right now.
But my point is to say this. I mean, if we talk about this model here, going back to the point I was making, which I think is an important point, we can't say this comes from the Bible based on what I've shared with you, talking about the expanse, talking about the idea that it was in the 19th century.
It wasn't an infinite expanse. They said expanse.
Well, let's look historically at it, or even the words. If you understand, that the concept of a vaulted heaven really comes from a misunderstanding of skeptics of the 19th century, then I would be inclined to say that this is what's deceiving us.
Well, like I said,
this vaulted heaven is not true to the Hebrew word rakia. And hold on, let me just, I want you to respond, but I want to make the point before you respond. If you look at the phenomenological usage of the word rakia, the firmament in the Bible, for example, starting in Genesis 1:14, you see that let there be lights in the midst of the firmament. Let there be lights in the midst of the firmament. But the firmament is also called heavens, plural. So if we say, well, we see one of the heavens is the heaven where God dwells. It's an expanse. You can't even end it. We look at another heavens, which is the atmosphere. So when I fly in an airplane, and I've flown pretty much all over the world. I guess you could say I've circumnavigated the globe. I've flown to Korea, I've flown to China, I've flown to Israel, I've flown to the Philippines many times. And so when I'm up there, I'm in the first heaven. I'm flying in the clouds. So the waters that are separated from the waters, that's the atmosphere, at least the first heaven. Paul speaks about 3. So the first one is where the clouds are. Those are the waters above. And I'm flying in them. And so when I fly in the airplane and I'm flying in them, this is an expanse. When we see the heaven that God dwells in, it's an expanse. There isn't this, and when we even look at the word itself.
Well, the only thing
it's stretched, it's compared to something that
the word that's missing in all this is infinite. If if they said God lifted the vault to an infinite level, then I would have to agree with you. But you know,
But the vault itself, I'm saying, is incorrect translation. So you have to, if you want to be true to the Hebrew, you can't use that 19th century.
but again, so even if you just say space, if you want to use the word space, the word infinite wasn't put in there. So like, in other words,
Oh, well, I said, I do believe in a bound universe. Personally, I do believe in that, but I don't believe in this model. I believe in a spherical Earth. I believe in a vast universe that is compared to the sands of the sea. The stars are compared to the sands of the sea. They are compared to the generations of believers throughout all the ages of man.
well,
So it is. Here's my point of view, and I'm not dogmatic about it. God is infinite. God has always existed. So my view is that He created many other universes. Now that's not. Some Adventists say that this universe itself is endless and infinite. I do believe that there is an unfallen universe, that there are unfallen worlds in perhaps what is called the heavenly universe, or maybe other universes. But I believe that when we start reading Genesis chapter 1, that's focusing on this universe.
see, I mean, I'm at the point now where I know it's not possible. Space travel is not possible. So NASA's fake. Space travel is not possible. If you want to tell me that on this plane there's another little puddle over here, maybe another one out over here on the plane, I might be able to go with that. That's not out of my realm of belief. But I'm at the point now where I know that space is fake. There's no rocket ship going up to space with the flimsy little doors.
But then how do you view this then? What is this?
You can't get, so here, this is the where we live under the dome, if you want to call
But
it.
how is this an expanse if it's a solid thing?
Well, whatever's up here, I don't know.
But this is included in the expanse.
Right, but what this is, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know where God lives. I can't tell you. I can't even imagine it. I can't start to dream about it.
Yeah, but if the first heaven is not a solid space, if the atmosphere is not a solid place, that you'll fly in you've flown in airplanes, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one heaven.
Well, I mean, you consider that a heaven. I just consider it under the dome, personally.
It's also solid is relative term as well. It's like frequency vibration.
Well, I mean, if I'm just looking at the way it's presented in the Bible, if this heaven is presented as an expanse.
Well, I don't know. You say it starts here. I
yes.
say maybe it starts here.
Well, Paul is saying the third heaven. The created firmament is heavens, plural. It's heavens.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that God calls it firmament, but He also calls it heavens, and it's plural.
I get it.
So that
I don't know where those levels are. If they start here or they start here. Does number one start here or does number one start here?
Well, the waters from the waters. What are the waters above the waters? That's the clouds. That's the clouds over there.
I kind of get the idea that the firmament might actually be another, type of water. I believe.
Well, I mean, specifically, the Bible is telling us the clouds, the waters above the waters it's the firmament that brings those waters above the waters, and then it also says that the firmament is heavens, plural. Then, well, what are these heavens? And Paul describes three heavens. Now, if the third one is where God dwells, and the first one is where the waters above the waters are.
I'm just saying I believe the waters are here. This layer above this. Then you got the oxygen. Yeah, obviously you have.
But there's water here.
Well, you got clouds in there. There's water in the clouds, obviously. But I'm not. I'm saying that we're actually covered by water.
Well, I mean, if we take the story of Noah's flood, the floodgates of heaven, that was the first instance in history when it rained. The rain came from clouds. The water from the ground was an upheaval of groundwater and volcanic activity. So if the water is coming from here, from the clouds would be included as they would be included as the firmament. The process by which that water above is separated from the water below is the firmament, or the heavens, plural. So if you look at what the Bible is saying, the clouds are within that first heaven. There's more than one. So if you say, well, there's waters here, but there's also water up here, and so this doesn't count, then how does that square up with what the Bible is saying? Because when the floodgates of heaven opened in Noah's flood, we're understanding that it was rain. It rained.
I believe it was rain, but I'm saying that it could have just as easily come from above. How do you open up floodgates? I don't know how to do it. Don't get me wrong.
No, but I mean the
Yeah.
nature of the floodgates, the
Uh-huh.
nature of them. The Bible is speaking with the language of floodgates. What is the nature of the floodgates?
Mm-hmm.
The clouds, the rain. It's not necessarily that there's an iron gate opening and closing.
Well, I mean,
I mean, it's kind of
Power
like,
4 winds and the way that's set up in the Bible, and if you look at it on a flat Earth and how it creates our jet streams and things like that, it makes a lot of sense. I really can't get into it now because there's a lot really to explain, and I can't just pull it off the top of my head.
but you can make some of the basic arguments, and this argument that I'm showing you, that when it rained 40 days and 40 nights, and then there was a rainbow where? The rainbow wasn't up here, the rainbow was here, and that was God's symbol of covenant with humanity. It was here. The rainbow is in the atmosphere.
Well, what are you saying? That was the first heaven where the rainbow was?
Yeah, the atmosphere.
That's fine.
So if this is the first heaven and it's an expanse and it's a non-material as far as being able to touch it, and the heaven where God dwells is also
What
not.
you're saying there's still another two levels above that.
The third one is the one where God dwells.
Right. So then you got the stars in that level.
No, the stars would be underneath it. Because remember, when the Bible says,
No, don't take his model as being anything correct. Because now I'm showing you that the sun and moon is way down here.
yeah, I mean that would be contrary
So
to the Bible as well.
Well, I guarantee
Because
you.
the Bible says they're in the firmament.
Well, like I said, there's a lot of space between here. So this is just a drawing that really doesn't have any basis of exact reality, right? I'm showing you this. I'm saying that I was showing you this earlier that the sun and the moon have to be much closer than we understand for it to work the way I'm talking about. It's got to work with perspective.
But are the sun and the moon spherical?
As far as I'm concerned, they're basically a flat disk. The moon seems to be a flat disk to me, and I could stare at the sun for hours on end without hurting my eyes, and it's a flat disk.
Don't do that. You're probably hurting your eyes and don't know it.
I'm pretty good.
I used to do that too. You got to acclimate to the sunrise and sunset. You can stay
Yeah, I do
It's
a
called
little
sun eating.
Anyway, just getting back to this. If this is where
Don't take the model.
no, I'm not. I mean, that's why I was asking you,
Yeah.
making the model for me.
Take this off here because then this is I don't know.
So then what is it?
I'm giving you the sun
But
and
this,
the
you're
moon.
saying the atmosphere is down here then.
Yeah, the atmosphere is underneath the sun and the moon.
So that would be
Then-
the first heaven.
Well, if that's what you want to call it, then yeah, that's the first one. This would be the second one above the
Yeah,
sun
because
and the
the Bible is clear. Again, when Paul mentions the third heaven, and when Genesis 1:14 says, these lights are in the firmament.
Mhm.
So you would have to start your
So
firmament all the way down
started-
here.
I showed you this though just to show you how the light would work because the sun and the moon are low. All right, so if they're only 3,500 miles above us, when they get 6,000 or 7,000 miles past us, that's why we see them set. The light hits that light. Perspective works like this, right? Everything above us comes to a vanishing point.
Yeah, but Paul, the problem with this is if you're beginning the heavens down here, definitely this is not solid. So why would this be?
This is no. I don't know.
This is what you're saying.
I don't know if this is or isn't solid. But I know this is what rotates, though. The Earth doesn't.
I understand that, but I'm only addressing the concept of what the heavens are.
But this may very well be set in some sort of solid. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know. We're not going to ever get there.
I mean, because if you fly in an airplane, you're flying in the clouds. You're flying in the atmosphere.
You're flying above the clouds.
So
Yeah, but you're not.
You can be flying above the clouds, so you're flying in the first heaven.
But you're not above the sun and the moon.
No, the sun and the moon would be in the second heaven.
So there's the second heaven.
So
I'm
if
not
you're
arguing
saying
with
this is
you on
the
that.
second heaven,
Uh-huh.
and so now you don't have an actual dome anymore.
Well,
You don't have an
it
actual
would be
solid.
It would be in this. In other words, the moon and the sun would be.
Yeah, but then
would
you would
be
have
in
to
it.
put it all the way down here.
I'll make it bigger. That's why
Like I said, you got to make it. Like I said, to scale and that whole thing. You can't
But
really. do
we're
it.
still talking about the same thing, though, Paul. It's still the same model.
Right.
And the problem is, what is this thing? This thing is made of what? If this is solid, it contradicts the heaven that God dwells in, and it contradicts the atmosphere. So how can this be?
Well, when you talk about a solid to us or solid to God?
Solid to
there's no
us.
such thing as solids, really. I mean, when you really get into physics.
No, I mean solid to us.
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know. I'm not saying
Okay.
that I have these answers.
Fair enough.
These aren't answers that I could answer because I've never been. I've never been to the South Pole. I'd like to be, and I've never been to the moon. I mean, I could go on the things that I've seen, and that's really all I can do.
Do you enjoy this conversation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's great.
Let me ask something else then. I know he's the troublemaker. This
Well,
guy.
I know you're going to
He
come
loves
up with something now.
He loves it.
Okay, here's the point. Remember, I was explaining about the 19th century textual critics that basically said this was either what the Babylonians believed or the later ones. Now, this goes to conspiracy theory.
Mhm.
Because if you look at people in the late 19th century, like, have you ever heard of Washington Irving?
Sure.
He's the one, really, him, and he was a skeptic, and he had this belief in evolution. Him, John Draper, and also Andrew Dixon White. These people were basically, and this is all in an interesting article. You can find it on Answers in Genesis by Danny Faulkner. Who's an astronomer, but he believes, obviously a creation scientist, but an astronomer. And what he was pointing out there, and it coincides with what Randall Yonker was saying, the archaeologist professor from Andrews University. What basically they were doing was they were promoting this idea that the church had held back science for all this time. They believed in a flat earth. It's not true. Not true. But they were saying that. That's the idea. That in the Middle Ages and throughout the era of Christendom, throughout the Christian era, this is what the church believed.
I got a question about your guy there. All right, so he's a creationist,
Yeah.
and he believes that what?
Oh, this is Danny Faulkner. He's an astronomer.
Right, he's an astronomer. So
Yeah.
here's the problem. He's a double agent. He's working for both sides of the fence. Because an astronomer, the guy who's sitting and looking at the stars, the Vatican, who has their own, telescope set up, those people that are looking at the stars aren't telling us the truth. The universities, the government, they hide the truth from us. He's a double agent.
But that falls into the conspiratorial approach.
Well, again,
it's a judgment.
You have
It's
to
a judgment.
You have to go there.
Yeah, but you're making
Once
a
you get to
judgment
where I'm
on.
at. I know.
You're making a judgment on
It's-
someone's motives.
Because
now.
it's a judgment based on my research over these years. I mean, I can't show you and teach you
I think you got to be
everything.
careful with that because remember, the Bible says for every idle word we have to give an account. And if you're willing to put your neck out there and say this guy's a double agent, he has
Well, if I can
evil
prove-
intents.
Well, here's the thing.
He is there to deceive.
If I can prove to you that the sun is only 3,500 miles above us, right, mathematically,
Yeah.
and then you and I both agree on that, then we then have to say that this guy is a double agent.
Yeah. If you could prove that to me,
Okay.
the only problem is, like I said, I'm very bad at math,
Well,
and I'm sure there's some other guy who's very good in math as well and doesn't believe that. I mean, you understand. I mean, you go on the internet, you can find plenty of people arguing, more scientists and PhDs and arguing against your position. And the only recourse is to say they're double agents or they are part of this
Well,
evil.
it's not really the only recourse. You know what? You do not say. Listen, think about how many colleges and universities. I went to physics. Did physics in college as well. So there's how many professors.
Now you have a degree in physics.
I don't have a degree in physics. No, I was a business major. I minored in physics. But I studied it my entire life. I mean, that was my one love. Now, the question is, with all of these physicists, supposedly, who are in all of these colleges, not one of them has the confidence to actually debate somebody that's showing them something about just simple stuff, like how far the sun really is from us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my point is this: if you say,
we just recently had an eclipse. And
Yeah.
everybody went out to look at it.
Yeah.
I was amazed by it. All right. So
I couldn't see it from where I was.
I had a pretty good view. I mean, we only got I want to say like that much of it, but I had a pretty good view. Now, if anybody saw the eclipse, and you know how light works, light is simple. There's a huge sphere up there of light. Okay? Now, if I take another sphere and put it in front of that, as it's getting in front of it, the light must shine around that sphere 360 degrees. Now, I told you I look at the sun, I'm not afraid of it. Just because the government tells me not to stare at the sun, I wasn't afraid of it. So I was looking straight at it. What I saw, and what pictures will show you, is that you had the sphere of the sun, and you saw what may or may not have been the moon, and its crescent cutting into the sun. But what you did not see, and you have to see this, you have a light source that's supposedly 93 million miles away, so far away. What we should have seen is that as the moon approached the sun, and the closer it got, you should have seen the light from the sun shining out on the other side of the moon. So you should have saw two spheres. We should have saw two spheres crossing each other up until the point that they got totality, and then you'd only see the one with the ring around it. And then as it exits, you should also see two spheres again. And we did not see that. All you see, it almost looks like somebody slipping like a card in there, but there was a perfect roundness to the sun and the blue sky where the moon should have been. And that light should have been shining at us from around the moon. And we should have saw it clearly. And you didn't.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that, it's our eyes deceive us because we're told so many things through science that this is the way it is, and don't look at the moon, and then don't look at the sun when you have an eclipse. And what it means is they've been deceiving us right along. They've been hiding it from us. And if you just people are out there, if they remember what they saw, and the few people that may have looked at it, but you should simply see two spheres crisscrossing one another, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
so what I'm saying is that they're much closer.
Yeah.
Whatever was eclipsing the sun is much closer. It's not 93 million miles away. They're in the same path almost. And how they crisscross, I don't know, obviously.
Well, the Bible is very clear that the heavens declare the glory of God. So, according to Psalm 19:1, God wants us to be able to understand the heavens. And if for 1,500 years, Christians and others, and throughout the Christian era, have understood the earth to be a sphere, and to basically have an understanding that is contrary to what you're saying, then how can that be? So for example, it's not correct to say, as I was pointing out, that the Jewish people took these ideas from the Babylonians, but it also isn't necessarily true that this is the cosmology that the Babylonians believed. This is not necessarily the case. There was somebody named Wayne Horowitz, and he put together a cosmology, the Babylonian cosmology. And what he basically came up with, I think I drew a little diagram here, let's see, is basically that the Babylonians believed in a series of planes, I think 6 planes. Mm-hmm. Now, so there was no vault or anything, it was just a series of planes on top of the other. But what's not clear about that, according to Randall Yonker, who's an archaeologist, he said, I've been studying these ancient writings and trying to understand these things. And it's not clear that the Mesopotamians or the Babylonians ever actually believed that as a cosmology. The Babylonians, for example, were more interested in astrology than they were in astronomy. They were not necessarily interested in mapping out a cosmology as they were interested in understanding what these patterns of movement in the planets were actually meaning for their own fortune here on Earth. And so they would accurately spend time calculating and figuring out how the planets would move. When the Greeks came along, they used the Babylonian writings. And so when you have someone like Pythagoras in around 600 BC, who's really talking about having a spherical earth. And other Greek writers who were using the Babylonian writings, they were using it not so much for the Babylonian cosmology. They didn't care about the Babylonian cosmology. They didn't think that that was correct, but they respected the Babylonians' accuracy with mapping out these planetary movements and motions. So the point about that is that construct of those 7 planes that are kind of held up by ropes, I believe, or strong cables, so that they're all hanging over one another. It may not be, and I don't think it is, understood necessarily even by the Babylonians to have been a cosmology as much as a theological construct. The point was, what did it say to them about astrology or about life or about other metaphysical issues? It wasn't necessarily, but it was the Greeks that were interested in having a cosmology. And so when somebody like Pythagoras comes along and he says, well, the earth is spherical. And then from that point on, you have eventually this domination of the idea of a spherical earth. So that in the days of Paul, in the Bible, in the 1st century AD, the dominant view, pretty much, because remember, Paul was a man for all people. Paul was Jewish by ethnicity, but he was a Roman citizen, and they say that Rome conquered on the battlefield, but the Greeks conquered in the classroom. So pretty much the Romans had accepted the Greek ideas, the Greek philosophical ideas, the Greek gods, all of that. And so the prevailing view, and Paul understood Greek philosophy as well. When he talks with the Greeks on Mars Hill, the Areopagus, he understood this was the dominant worldview, that the earth was a sphere. It wasn't any issue for him. He didn't say, well, this is contrary to what the Bible. There's no uproar. And there was no uproar. I mean, if you take it even further, throughout the entire Christian era, whether you're talking about Clement or the Church Fathers, Ignatius, all the way to John of Damascus of the 8th century, or even beyond that. I have a book, for example, called.
Put Galileo in jail over it, didn't it?
No, he was that's a little more complicated. From what I read, it was more of a controversy between him and the Pope at the time. I think it was Pope Urban. But it wasn't. It was. There were a lot of priests and those who are in the intellectual sphere in the church that actually supported Galileo's view. But apparently there was a conflict between him and the Pope. So it was a little more difficult. But the idea of the conflict between a geocentric universe or a heliocentric universe, that was the main conflict. But as far as there being a spherical earth, throughout the entire church age, no one questioned that. Like I said, I have a book called, it's from the 1960s, but the artwork you can look up on Google. If you look up on Google images or conceptions of the earth in the Middle Ages, just as this book that I have called the Horizon Book of the Middle Ages will show, they believed in the spherical earth. So this idea, so if anything, if there was a deceiver who was trying to draw people away from God, we could look at and they said they said they were materialists. They said they were evolutionists. Washington Irving, John Draper, Andrew Dixon White, who were trying to say this was the view that the church had, and the church held back progress. And so, basically, according to this article here, now you want to get on the right foot, church? Accept evolution. But the reality is the church was never in favor of this throughout so if we talk clearly on the church age, throughout the church age, this was never accepted. It was always, so if anything, somebody could say this comes from paganism, they could say this comes from the Babylonians, but I don't even think you can say that.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we've already proven that, the observation, laser, it's flat. I mean, water doesn't curve. There's no instance that water curves. So the Pacific Ocean between California and Asia, there's no curve. We know that.
Well, how do you prove it? I mean, do you prove it by your own observation? Or do you prove things by the Word of God? Or do you prove things by... I mean, the reality is,
There's
If
gotta
the
be an
human
error.
mind is, if the human mind is finite, there's nobody that knows everything, even about one subject.
Right.
So if we say, well, this is, let's say this is all there is to learn.
Mhm.
Okay, this is all there is to learn. How much of that would you say you know?
Of all of that,
Of all that, this is all the knowledge that is available.
you move this little speck over here.
Right here. And I think
That's all I know.
I would say the same thing. Any honest person, if this is all, I mean, you can't even give a percentage of an unknown quantity.
What I know, here's what I
So
know.
what percentage do we know?
I'm going to tell you the percentage of what I do know.
We don't
for sure.
know.
No, what I do know is that mainstream education is indoctrination, and it's not education anymore.
Hard to
They've
say.
gotten to a point now where they've indoctrinated.
Oh, I agree in general, but that doesn't mean. I guess this is where I differ with Mike.
Common Core.
This is the difference. And I agree with the problem with Common Core, and I agree that the halls of education in this country have been, generally speaking, taken over by those who are. I'm speaking in a practical sense. I'm not judging anybody's heart. But if you look at what people are learning in school, what they're being indoctrinated with, I agree that much of it is godless and it's wickedness. I'm not judging anybody's heart. I bring it all down to the fact that man has a sinful nature, and there are probably a lot more people that are unconverted than there are converted. And generally speaking, if you're unconverted and you have knowledge, just as Paul said, you're going to use that knowledge to boast. So I think that that's a problem. But if we look at this, and we're honest with this, and I think anybody's honest, we'll say, well, this is all I know. And honestly, I can't even put that. Because it's almost like if you're in a boat in the middle of nowhere, you can't calculate how close you are to the surface, to the shore.
Right.
I mean, you can't say, well, I'm this percentage closer, I'm that
I think we
percentage.
both agree we can't even expect
So
to
my
know
point
everything.
is, my point is this. This is my point. It's only God that has that infinite knowledge. So to get truth, we have to ultimately put on our biblical glasses.
Here's the only thing that I'm saying here is that we've been lied to. That I'm not.
I think in many ways I agree with you.
This
but not,
model, you could do whatever you want with it. Yeah, it might be wrong, it might be right. There might be 6 other ways to look at it. I don't know. I'm standing on my own 2 feet, and I could barely reach the ceiling.
Yeah.
So how do I know? I don't know anything for sure.
He likes Common Core.
Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah. They're teaching the kids how to pray to Mecca now.
No, but let me just finish what I was trying to say before. I know I'm going on, but I am bringing it to a point that I do want you to respond to. So I mentioned Pythagoras, but when you get into the 15th and 16th century, you have church scholars like the Dominican named Xanthus Pagnino, and basically he was being true to the Hebrew in his translation, and he said, expanse. That should be the translation of that word. This is long before those that were the 19th century, those that were actually, those that did have the agenda. In other words, those that had that wicked agenda were saying this is what Christians believe. So if anything, this is coming out of those that had the wicked agenda. The Christians that didn't have that agenda, that weren't pushing evolution, that weren't pushing materialism, throughout that time, and I'm not saying, I'm speaking in the practical sense, I don't know. I mean, obviously, as a Christian, I would look at someone like a Dominican, and I'm a Protestant, so I'd say, well, that's not probably, not the best person to point to. But this is something that you'll find universal. In other words, Adventists, people like these guys who are believers, there's plenty that we don't believe in and agree with the Catholic Church on. But when it comes to the circle of the earth being a sphere, I mean, we pretty much all agree.
But we agree but we've never been there.
No, we've never been there. But whatever.
Everybody stands on the same earth. We've never been into space, and what I've seen is fake. And a lot of people agree.
Are
with
you
that.
absolutely sure it's fake?
From what I've seen, I can tell you that I believe, personally, absolutely, NASA is 100% fake. And that the mathematical calculations that I've done myself and what I see other people doing.
Now, you know that when it comes to when it comes to certain things, and I've held myself in check in this way, where I said, does God know it's fake? Does God know it? And
Well,
I
God
think
knows
that,
the devil roams the earth, right?
yeah, I know, but the only reason I'm saying is because I found that sometimes I've pushed things a little further than if I step back in good conscience I would. That's why I'm careful to say, I can't say that Newton was somebody who was working with some evil conspiracy in mind, or Galileo, or Copernicus, or Louis Pasteur, and these were all Bible believers. I mean, Newton was a six-day creationist. Um, if you look, for example, at this other scholar of the 16th century named Benedict Arius Montanus, again, he says expanse. That's the translation. Now, my question to you is this kind of what I was bringing it down to. If you wanted to really prove a flat Earth, theoretically, at least from I've gone on the websites, at least from the diagrams that I've seen, which coincide with your diagram here, of a flat Earth. Why wouldn't it be possible? Why can't the flat earthers, for that matter, get a powerful enough telescope? And let's say if you go to the shore of the Atlantic Ocean and you have a powerful enough telescope, why can't you see Europe? Why can't you see China?
Because there's a limit to light. Light is,
I mean, a powerful enough
doesn't
telescope.
matter how powerful it is. And the problem with being on a plane, so if you're in Europe standing
Yeah, I
on
mean,
the
it's a
shore,
flat. You're talking about a flat.
exactly. But here's the problem: if you can see Europe, obviously, as you go up, as you rise up. If two telescopes are standing on the shore and they're exactly the same distance apart, what I was telling you here is wave field convergence gets in the way. It might get in the way at 50 miles or 150 miles or 250 miles. But you're not going to get 3,000 miles across the ocean. It's not possible. Wave field convergence gets in the way because you have two people at the same height. Now, don't get me wrong. Now, you're standing here. If this guy goes higher and higher and higher, you see, no problem. And what happens is, as you get higher, the horizon rises with you. If you haven't noticed, just even if you're on a bridge and you're going up on a bridge and you watch the horizon rises right to your eyes. What doesn't now? The horizon gets further and further. The higher you get, the further you can see, and the horizon rises with you. In a real sphere, if you were on a sphere, as I rose, the edge would drop off. I would see it immediately because I could see my horizon now, and I know supposedly that we're on a sphere, and I know that that's supposedly dropping off. So if I rose up 500 feet, I might be able to see a little further, but I'm going to see I'm going to see the ball as I go. But you never see that. What happens is as I go up, the horizon goes with me. The horizon goes with me because I'm able to see further and further and further and further away. So no matter how powerful your telescope is, in this situation, you got light field convergence. Bring it up 500 feet, and you're going to see a lot further. Bring it up, I don't know how many feet you have to go, but we know that. I mean, I'm saying there are balloons that they're putting up there that are high enough to see great distances. And
So, but
they're taking these pictures.
why with all this technology, why isn't anybody able to see that ice wall around the whole Earth? Why haven't the
they're
flat
not
earthers
showing
come
us.
across? Why haven't the flat earthers? There are plenty of them. Why haven't they put their money into the technology to get a powerful enough telescope and show everybody it?
What, you're talking about a telescope up in space.
Or whatever
Well,
they
that's what
need.
you have to do. So,
Get a balloon or.
Well, I mean, think realistically.
Let's say you go to the edge of Australia. You go down to the horn of South America, and you get the telescope, but you can't see that wall.
Not unless you get higher, because you're going to get wave field convergence.
So you have what you've done again. This falls into a highly elaborate category. In other words, and I don't know all of this is true. I'm just taking your word for it. But what you've done is you've created. I'm not saying you created, but you've come up with an answer why we cannot see the edge of the world, even now, even in 2017. We can't see it.
Here's the reason you can't see it, because the Antarctic Treaty, which was just recently updated, won't allow you to go see it. You're not allowed to go anywhere near the Arctic Circle.
But even with a telescope, even with a drone.
Well, look, you have a good idea. There are people right now that are doing all kinds of experiments all the time. So
because that would put an end to the whole argument.
Maybe it's a good idea, but don't forget, putting that high-powered telescope, 100,000. You know, we should do it. I don't disagree. You make
Can,
perfect
can
sense.
you really differentiate between if you got a clear blue sky and you're looking at a white background? Can you really see the difference between the sky and an ice wall?
I mean, why not?
You wouldn't be able.
Why not?
Well, with the right,
Why
telescope,
not
you
with
could.
a powerful enough telescope?
I mean, I'm
with a
not disagreeing.
polarized telescope?
Look,
Yeah.
you're only allowed, from what I understand, with the Antarctic Treaty, the closest you can get is like the 30th parallel. So if you're saying, okay, get down as close as you can, put a balloon up 100,000 miles, and have a telescope, but don't forget, nobody's going to get in that balloon because you're going to, somebody's going to kill themselves.
Send up a drone. We have technology now.
Yeah.
You could deliver pizza with a drone.
But the thing, well, but the thing is, you do have this Antarctic Treaty in place, and they do not want us to be there. I mean, research.
Yeah, I know, but
Antarctic
you
Treaty,
get down to the edge of
Go as
South
far as you
America.
can.
You go to New Zealand. I mean, look, like I said, I've flown all over the world.
Uh-huh.
I've flown up high over the clouds. I guess I've literally circumnavigated the globe.
Mm-hmm.
So when I flew to the Philippines, that
And
according to the map,
And you were never sideways.
I would never see.
You never were sideways while you were flying over here by South America, right? How is it that you stay flat?
No, but
How
I'm
is it-
saying
how does
nobody
it
ever
work?
said, well, there it is.
How does it work that we were over here and we never crooked? If I look at a building 30 miles away,
Yeah.
all right, and it's supposed to be over the curve, I zoom it in, right? So now it should be slightly tilting away from me if I'm actually on a ball. And there shouldn't be a lot, but it's always perfectly straight.
Yeah, but why not? Why not? I mean, with the same question. Let's say if I go to the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, I go down to the beach right here in Long Island.
Mhm.
I can't even see Europe.
You can't because of the wave field conversion. Once you go up, you can. You should be able to see it with the telescope.
I can't even
Now
see.
you can see it because Europe's all the way over here. Over here, you hit light wave convergence. When you're up here, if you were in a balloon,
Yeah, but so even if you're saying if I go up there,
right,
I should be able to shoot that telescope straight across the whole world.
you should be able to see Europe. But what happens is it rises up with you. So Europe will be here, and it'll keep on rising, and then at a certain point you get light wave convergence for everything.
Yeah.
So you only can see
You're really depending a lot on that light wave convergence for your argument.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, there was a guy who I wrote about it, and about 2 months later, I just did a little research just to see if there's anything further on it. And there was a guy on YouTube who put a video out that just blew you away. He hit it, he nailed it. He explained exactly how our sight works and how that light wave convergence worked. He used a different term for it. I saved the video, and YouTube has taken it down. No reason to take it down. The guy was, sweet as pie and just explaining science.
Yeah.
And they completely wiped it off of
Censorship problem all over YouTube,
Yeah.
Twitter now. You got to back out of our.
Well, I know, but I mean, they're even doing that against people who speak, biblically about other issues. John Spellman had some
Be
issues.
legal soon. Oh yeah.
But what I'm saying about this, I mean, we can take this. So
Yeah,
I mean, I'm a simple man. If I accepted what you're saying, it would be a leap of faith because I don't understand it.
No, I would never expect that.
Yeah. So
What
in
I'd
other
like to do,
words-
I'd be
words,
happy to do is, we'll talk. I'll send you a couple of things that I feel is solid. You could, this whole thing is about research. I don't want it. Nobody could just believe. Of course, if I saw myself telling you this 5 years ago, I'd say, oh shit, I must have lost my mind. Yeah. I might have checked myself into a mental institution 5 years ago before this actually happened.
but you see the problem. I do see a parallel here.
Uh-huh.
If you talk with someone like Richard Dawkins, or you ever argue with some of these atheists, and you try and get them to explain DNA, they're coming up with all kinds of elaborate answers. And like I said, my
I don't have
speculation.
elaborate answers.
It is an elaborate
Well,
answer
this
from
one-
my perspective, because
This one is because you never heard it before, but this is
Yeah, I know.
This is something that you'll get eventually.
Yeah, but even then, even if you say it, even the way you said it, it's not enough for me to just accept it, or
No.
even to understand what
But I
you're
don't want
saying.
anybody to just accept what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
so what I'm
That's-
saying-
because this is this is what I understand. You
Yeah.
understand something differently. 5 years ago, I understood something different.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm only saying this. You can understand why it would make more sense for me to accept something that is clear to me than something that's unclear.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
I
But let me ask you another question, not to cut you off, but I do want to ask this question. If the world is flat like this, why do we see the sun set?
Because just what I said, it's all perspective. It's low in the sky. It's a lot lower than we believe. We couldn't. If it was 93 million miles away, we would never see it set, except until the Earth spun around and we were on the opposite side. But since it's close, it's perspective. The railroad track. So I'm standing here on the floor.
Because you're saying it's close,
It's very close.
and yet at the same time it sets.
It sets because all right. So I'm standing on the ground, and there's railroad tracks on my side, and those railroad tracks lead to the horizon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you got a picture like this. If you have, this is.
So you're standing here, and the railroad tracks are.
Oh, you're
in front of
standing
you.
here.
Right. Your railroad tracks are in front of you, and they end here.
These are the railroad
Those
tracks?
are railroad tracks. It's
Okay.
a flat ground, right? So everything from you now
But if you're standing, you would be looking at it like this.
well, you can look at it that way too, right? Look at it that way. Well, so we take this for granted. We take this understanding for granted the way our sight works. This is the way our sight works.
Yeah.
So now, if you had a telescope, you can see a lot further down the tracks. Okay, but
Yeah.
our eyes only let us go to this horizon.
Let me blow this up a little.
Okay. Yeah, very slow.
I don't mean to erase my beautiful
No,
artwork. But let's just see. So we have a now if we have this perspective,
Mhm.
and that is something I know about because I do have a Bachelor in Fine Arts.
Nice. Yeah,
So-
I was an advertising officer.
So here we have
That's just perspective on the ground. What we don't take into consideration is that that's also the perspective from the sky. So it's not different. It doesn't change in the sky. It's the same thing. Let me borrow your eraser. Now, when you really get in some really great artists have kind of like shown how clouds work, right? So this cloud is right over your head. But did you ever see the clouds that are all kind of look the same but then the next cloud out here is a little smaller. And then this cloud is a little smaller still. And the cloud over here is a little smaller again. And so on. They're all the same size. They're getting further and further away from you. And then this cloud is only this big. Down to here. And then at that horizon point that you're viewing this, right? Same thing. You know, the clouds kind of disappear. They're all the same size above your head. So the sun is just it's just getting further and further
so
away.
you're
from
applying
you.
this to the sun.
Well, the sun is the same thing happens with the sun. So when the sun is right above your head, all right, as it gets further and further away, it's smaller. Well, obviously, once it's smaller. And they got pictures depicted.
Yeah, but the
showing how
problem
this
is, I
works.
mean, I've seen sunsets.
I know you have.
I've
It
seen,
seems
and
as
you've
though
seen them too,
and
and
it
the
seems
sun
the
is
sun
just
gets
as
bigger.
It's just as big here.
That's just a reflection. That's what happens is it's actually reflecting through, and that's how you're seeing it. And I could show you video proof of how it gets smaller. And even though
Yeah, but I mean, I don't need a
camera-
video. I've seen with my own eyes.
right. Your eyes deceive you in a number of instances, and this happens to be one of them. If you watch what actually happens,
Optical illusion.
right? This is the
Yeah, but when we see the sun up here,
right.
and if we watch it, we'll see it come down here, and it's always the
No,
same size.
It's not actually. You'll see.
I
can show
mean,
you.
from what I've seen, it even
Well,
looks bigger here.
Right. It does.
But when you look at the sun in the mid sky, it's just the same size as over here.
It appears to be because of the way it shows. When you
Now you see that's a problem because
I'll show you a video.
I don't need to see a video. I could see a sunset.
I understand, but you're accepting your eyes to be the perfect visual to give you that exact thing.
If
I'm showing you
if I look in the sky,
the way this perspective works.
yeah, but the problem with your explanation is if your explanation is true, the sun should be tiny over here, tiny, and when it's in the middle of the sky, it should be like this
Well, no.
because it's right overhead.
The sun is as big as it is, obviously.
Yeah, but if it's perspective, this gets bigger when it's closer.
Right.
So that would apply to the
Well, don't
sun.
forget, it's not closer. It's 3,500 miles when it's straight over your head, and it's 7,000 miles, let's say, when it's setting from us. But it's still 3,500 miles.
Yeah, so
up,
it
but
should look really
7,000
big
miles
over
away.
your head.
Well, it doesn't look. It looks as big as it is. That's how big.
I mean, look, you
You know what I'm
said
saying?
this is the
You're not
dome
going to change
here.
the size because the size is what it is.
If this is the dome here, and you got the sun here, and this is where you are, and now you got the sun over here, and you're saying that it's vanished out of your sight, and yet it's just as big here as it is over here. Shouldn't
not.
it
This
look
is
a lot bigger here?
I can show you that's an optical illusion. If you want to go online, I can show you how it works. No, but it's true.
Go ahead and show me.
I know it's
Go ahead and show me. I mean, that's you see, that's something that goes against common sense, or against against my own eyes. I
Is
see
this
these
YouTube?
things.
What are we in here, Mike?
Yeah, you're on YouTube. Yeah.
All right.
So I'm going to do a search there. Let me know what you put it in there. If I could bring it up too as well and show it on the screen at the
And
same time.
remember what I said. The more absurd, the more elaborate the explanation. And that's what I think is happening.
You know what? I'm pulling this up without seeing it at all, so I don't know what's.
What are the keywords you're using?
I'm just the most undeniable proof of flat Earth sun.
This is the one here, then. And I've seen that one, and that video is not clear.
You watch this?
Yeah, it just shows the sun rising. I could see that on my own. But look at it. If you look at it, okay, go
Which
ahead.
one did you look at? The first one?
I think I've seen this one.
All right, let's look at it. Like I said, I'm just looking at it blind, so I haven't seen it before.
I thought you had videos up here. Your own videos.
My own stuff, I put very little. I have a website.
But I mean, we don't see. If you're saying this is not an illusion, this is not an illusion, but this is. When does it become an illusion?
When it gets big at the where it's setting off the horizon, that's when it.
But as far as your eyes see, you don't see that. You just see the same shape.
You do. You actually we see it. Our eyes see it as being basically the same size, but the camera picks it up as being.
I think I probably got to start.
What's the name of that?
Green Ponds. There it is. So
See how it's. You understand? You gotta watch it.
there are clouds over there,
Well, I
down there.
understand. But
I
it's-
mean, you can't even see it now. It's so bright. But you can't say that the sun is bigger here than
it's
it
getting
is.
smaller. It's going away from us. and it's
But it
getting
hasn't
smaller.
vanished out of sight.
Mute the sound.
In other words, it hasn't reached its vanishing point because you can still see it. If it reaches vanishing point, it gets smaller until you can't see it.
Like I said, you gotta really look at it and absorb it. But if you take it,
I mean, look at it. It doesn't look any smaller. It's just brighter because the light is
to me,
shining.
it's definitely gotten a lot bigger. It's getting bigger.
But you're seeing the light. You're saying the sun is a disk.
Watch, yeah. This is what this guy's.
So this is wrong too.
No, it's not wrong.
Yeah, because look,
This is-
you're over here. You're
No.
not on that plane.
You're on the plane. You're looking at the plane.
No. If you want to be fair about it, you got to put the guy's eyes on the plane because that's where we are.
Well, that's
We're
what
on
he
the
did.
plane.
He
He
has-
put us down here. He put us so that this is where we are. We're off the plane. That's not an accurate depiction because you're off the plane. You're down here. You got to put the guy's camera right on the desk.
I see what you're saying, but we're only like a little.
But
We're
that.
nothing in the scheme.
Yeah,
of
but
how
that
tall we are
also
compared to
contradicts
the-
what you're saying because the coin is getting smaller and smaller. This sun is not getting smaller and smaller.
It is. That's what these pictures are showing you. It is getting smaller. Supposed to see how it's getting smaller?
No, that's clouds there,
Mm-hmm.
and the sun is just going behind the clouds. I've seen the sunset in Michigan over Silver Beach. It's huge.
Right.
That's just the same size. So that's a weak argument, I think.
Well, I mean,
I think that's probably one of the weakest arguments.
you don't like that one.
What do you feel about that? I mean, because you're asking me, instead of to trust what I see, you're saying don't trust what you see, trust what I'm saying.
I'm not saying trust what I'm saying. It's, I've looked into
You're
it
not
long
saying
enough.
that?
I'm looking into it long enough that the clouds work like this, and the sun then has to work the same way.
Well, I guess
It's the things in the sky have to work the same as altogether.
guess
So
we're going
this-
to have to agree to disagree on that one.
Yeah, okay.
Let me do another one. As an artist, you have an art background, and I've seen these photos, of the Earths. You say they're fake, but if you go on, we live in the age where John Podesta's emails are hacked, WikiLeaks, the Black Web, ClimateGate. I mean, there's nothing safe on the computer. Government Files Act, and in all of that, there haven't been an exposing of these NASA things on a grand scale, like WikiLeaks. I'm talking about not some website over here in the dusty corner.
No,
But I mean, when it came to the WikiLeaks, that was all over the place. When it came to what happened with this guy in Hollywood, Weinstein, that was all over the place.
True, but don't you?
So even in this day, if
Media is controlled.
yeah, but that was contrary to people who are powerful in the media. Harvey Weinstein is powerful in the
They
media,
have to give you something,
and
otherwise
he
there'll
was
be an
taken
uprising.
down.
Otherwise there'll be an uprising where people, the masses come together without it being
Everything's a
exposed.
conspiracy.
It calms people down.
There's that middle category, conspiracy. It's got to be a conspiracy, but then it becomes unprovable. Then we can say anything. But I'm saying the proof, and I appreciate your patience. But the proof to show with all of these exposed, I mean, government emails.
I'm with Mike. I think that all the world's a stage, and the government is part of that. They're actors. From the judge that you go in when you get pulled over by the police, and he's wearing a uniform, he's wearing a costume. The judge who has to wear a costume. They're bringing us into a theater, and they're reading us their acts that we're supposed to be beholden to. It's all a theater. So and
Yeah, but what
North
you're
Korea.
saying,
I don't believe
Well,
I don't believe there's a little fat Asian guy in North Korea who's really any real threat to us. I think that he's part of the stage.
I'll only say this, and I'll give you the last word. But the argument that you're using against the sun is contrary to your argument against the stars. If you see the stars, the stars are the same here as they are here or as they are here. They don't get smaller here. They're still the same size. But if you're further up north, you could see that circumpolar zone of the North Star and the stars around it. They're much higher up in the horizon. The further south you go, they get closer and closer to the horizon. Doesn't that show you there's a sphere?
Until they go away.
Yeah, because then when you go down all the way down here, then you see the stars down in the other pole.
Right.
But wouldn't that show you there's a curve? Well, how do you explain that?
The curve, you know.
I mean, this is basically the conclusions that ancient people have drawn way before NASA and throughout the Christian era was supported. And like I said, if anybody was talking about a flat earth, it was those antagonists of Christianity that was saying Christians believe that.
Well, no, because this doesn't. I don't believe at any point that this
What the
goes
Mayans
against
believe. The
Christianity.
Mayans studied the stars for 2,000 years.
Yeah, but are we going by the Mayans or are we going by the Bible?
Going by the,
Well, that's my.
Yeah, but the Mayans didn't have a belief whether one way or the other, actually.
Oh, I don't know. I'm just asking.
Well, I think I got to conclude my end of the talk. So
Yeah.
you can have the last word, but there's
No.
a lot more to be said about it.
Absolutely, and like I said,
To be continued.
My word is just simple that
And that wasn't simple though, for why the sun looks sun looks so big when it's down there.
It takes more than that just to really grasp it. So it's not, you're not going to get it just off of that.
Get all the flat earthers together. Go down to South America on the Horn.
Right.
Go down there. Get a powerful enough technology. Figure out how to get those pictures of the ice wall. Because until then, what you have really are explanations. And it's almost like the explanations, in my mind, for anybody who wants to defend something, and I'm not trying to be harsh, but let's just say something that has been dealt with already.
I'm not defending it. You know what? If something that I said doesn't resonate with somebody, I understand it. And if you're going to get it, you're going to get it. And eventually, people do. Like I had a friend that just a couple of days ago emailed me and said, "Paul, you were right." You know, and they had the epiphany. You know, watch what happens here. So this is supposed to be the.
That's a picture of the Earth.
That's from Apollo. That's supposed to be a picture of the Earth from Apollo. I don't think we have any volume. How's the volume?
Behind the scenes.
You gotta make the volume go on that much?
Oh, yeah. It's on the volume.
What I would say, look at this article, for example, here. This is not even a Christian site. You don't have to read it. I'll just show you this.
I just watched this for 2 seconds, and you gotta rewatch it later.
Yeah.
number one window, and there isn't any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter will not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government will have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television
What's
audience,
that?
dated
This-
July
the title of the
18,
video, not the-
1969.
In case I forget to put it into
Neil
a.
Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from,
Yeah, let me.
Just watch those 2 seconds. Almost done.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only had one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
North America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
They have another one where they actually turn the lights on
Yeah.
inside the capsule.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with these videos. I'm just looking at them now the first time, so it's hard for me to really comment on what they mean. But like I said, even if you would argue that, that still doesn't prove that the Earth is flat.
And the scene
Well,
It doesn't prove that because, like I said, the ancients have. Look at this. What this point
had
here.
they done so,
I mean, even if you go so far as say the whole thing was staged, even that doesn't prove the Earth is flat.
well,
And I don't think it was staged. But even if you argue that, it still doesn't prove it.
it took me.
I think this is a powerful proof right here.
No, that's. It took me a solid 3 months before I was hooked to believe that I have to keep on studying. And it took me another year and a half where I continued. And I got to the point where I'm at now. So there isn't one video I could show you. There isn't one thing that I could explain to you.
Yeah, I understand that.
There isn't, I don't have any heroes for the flat earth. There are some really good people out there doing some great work. And then you have to study it yourself.
Yeah, well, like I said, if I approach it
With an open
biblically,
mind. Just with an open mind.
well, I want to approach it with a fair mind. An open mind is different. If I approach it from what I know from the Bible, from my own experience, and it just like I said, from this, it has to to understand that this concept of the Earth is actually a misconception from the 19th century to say that's what Christians believed, when throughout the Christian era they didn't believe that. They didn't believe this. So who's introducing this concept? It's not the Christians, it's the ones who are attacking Christianity. So you're taking a point of view that was introduced by enemies of the church.
Well, when you say the church, who are we talking about?
I'm in a, no,
We're not talking
from
about
the days of
Vatican
Paul. So even the medieval, so my concern is to say what did Christians believe? So basically, if the world is, and the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God, the church has never understood the heavens
You're saying
in all this time.
Pre-Columbus, they believed the earth was round?
Yes.
I never.
Oh, you need to read about that. It was going all the way back to Pythagoras. But definitely in the days of Paul, which is first century AD, throughout the church age, no, there was the dominant view was a spherical Earth. Maybe there was
dominant.
Oh yeah, there might have been a guy here and there. I mean, I only because I can't sweep Leo, Copernicus, Kepler, Newton. So it's only this concept is introduced by the 19th century historical critical scholars and those like I mentioned, Washington Irving, John Draper. They were saying this is what the church believed. No, they didn't. So in a way, you're kind of falling into their caricature.
No, but how would the people of the 1500s even have a one way or the other? The average person, have a one way or the other. They just have to believe whatever science.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got people like
you
have people like Aristophanes back in 200 BC, who using the shadows and using trigonometry calculated the circumference of the Earth. This is all the way back before the Christian age. Aristophanes. He's mentioned in the article by Danny Faulkner. So he's mentioned over here. See? So this is back 200. Eratosthenes. That's how you say it, I guess. This is back in 200. And just using the measurements, like I said, observing the stars. I talked about the circumpolar zone and the celestial, the North Star.
I give you a lot of information on that. You should look at with the North Star. It's very interesting.
But I'm saying this is how the ancients calculated these things. Magellan, starting the voyage that went around the world. And like I said, I mean, technically you could say I've circumnavigated the globe, and plenty of people have since then. And they've never seen any of these things, ice wall or flat Earth or any of that.
Well, the ice wall.
Columbus knew the Earth was round. That's how he thought he would get to India. He didn't know America was in the way.
For me, Columbus was part of the, is what they used. They used Columbus to make everybody believe the Earth was round.
Well, I mean, it wasn't just Columbus.
All he did was go to the, Andes.
Well, he came to the where did he land in Barbados or something? Yeah, around there. But still, I mean, his understanding was an understanding that prevailed throughout the Middle Ages, throughout Christendom, from the time of Paul. So if we're talking about what the church believed, and like I said, this is a belief that is not just Catholic belief. Protestants believe in this. Seventh-day Adventists, who are contrary to Catholics, we believe it.
Here's what.
Ellen White. Have you heard of Ellen White?
Heard the name of it.
Well, Ellen White is a big name in the Adventist church, and she constantly talks about globe. If you go on the White estate and you put in the word globe, you'll see globe, 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 and she uses the word globe.
I'm going to give you some really good science that some people are using.
Yeah.
And then look at it. That's all. And don't worry about look, this is the Bible. This is what people say about the Bible. So there's two different things for me. This I believe in. This I so believe in. We're just at a different point right now. I'm going to make you a bet that if you really look at the science side of it, just and you spend a couple months playing around with it, then you're going to change your mind.
That's where my diagram before. If I just look at things scientifically, this is my knowledge. But I have to look at things through biblical glasses.
But
God's understanding is...
Your biblical glasses will come on after.
Anyway, my wife's calling.
I appreciate it.
Don't put your good biblical glasses on after. Have them on first.
No. Leave them on, but like I said, you got to just look at the science part of it. But it's pretty interesting. It's fun stuff.
Well, it was a good talk with more to be said.
Yep, good stuff.
And this is Paul LaRoche.
LaRocca.
I'm sorry, LaRocca. Sorry about that. So it was a good talk.
Yep.
And thank you for spending time with me.
I appreciate it.
Cut there.
Cut.
Press stop down there.
All right.
Yours.
All right, I got Okay, so we all got our evidence, I guess. Even though that was Mike's idea to start trouble.
That's it. I'm a good troublemaker.
Nah, this was just a talk. There's no proof, no nothing yet.
Jesus was a
I'll send
troublemaker
you some
too.
stuff. Mike will send you some.
Yeah, he's got to be willing to put the time in, like you said.
Yeah, you gotta put a little time in.
Could keep putting.